Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. And it's not just an ATP Geopolitics video, it is of course a Silicon Curtain video with Jonathan Fink. Well done. Welcome Jonathan
Well done, you little chap. Oh yes, doing
well
awfully well. Well done for being alive. I mean, that's how it feels at the moment.
Yeah, it's crazy times we live in. And well, what we're going to be talking about tonight, the Coalition of the Willing meeting in France with the 30 plus nations that met with Zelensky. Then, of course, a minerals deal that I talked about personally myself this morning. I don't know if you have done on your videos, but there were rumors of it coming out this morning with a leaking of the deal. And now it's got, mainstream media's got hold of it. People have analyzed it, and yeah, it's looking like extortion yet again. So yeah, it is crazy times.
You kindly shared the link with me. I've had a look at the article in the Telegraph, which I normally can't see behind the firewall, but
it's a gift article.
This is an extraordinary article. We can't obviously gift it to the entire community, but
we can. That link is a gift link.
Okay, hooray! Yeah, everyone read it for free. They'll love us there. This seems to me. I mean, you've gone into this in more depth. This deal seems worse, in fact, than the very first draft, which we'd already labelled extortion. I mean, have I interpreted that correctly?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if we just look at the beginning of the article, Donald Trump is holding a gun to the head of Vladimir Zelensky, demanding huge reparations payments and laying claim to half of Ukraine's oil and gas and hydrocarbon resources, as well as almost all its metals and much of its infrastructure. The latest version of the minerals deal obtained by the Telegraph is unprecedented in the history of modern diplomacy and state relations. I mean, this is Daily Telegraph, right-wing newspaper, really going to town on this. I say that, because you might think it would otherwise be very supportive of, say, Donald Trump, maybe in other contexts, but it's not here. It's an expropriation document, said Alan Riley, an expert on energy law at the Atlantic Council. There are no guarantees, no defense clauses. The US puts up nothing. The Americans can walk away. The Ukrainians can't. I've never seen anything like it before. The text leaves little doubt that Mr. Trump's chief objective is to incorporate Ukraine as a province of America's oil, gas, and resources industries. It dovetails with the parallel talks between the US and Russia for a comprehensive energy partnership, including plans to restore West Siberian gas flows to Europe in large volumes, with US companies and Trump-aligned financiers gaining a major stake in the business. The revived gas trade would flow through Ukraine's network and later via the Baltic to the sabotage Nord Stream pipelines are brought back on stream. The new draft states that the United States Ukraine Reconstruction Investment Fund will control Ukraine's critical minerals or other minerals and oil, natural gas, including liquefied natural gas, fuels, or other hydrocarbons and other extractable materials. All critical materials listed in the US Energy Act are covered, including both rare earths and 50 other minerals such as lithium, titanium, cobalt, aluminium, and zinc. The US will control infrastructure linked to natural resources, quote, including but not limited to roads, rail, pipelines, and other transportation assets, ports, terminals, and other logistics facilities and refineries, processing facilities, natural gas liquefaction and or regasification facilities, and similar assets, end quote. 3 of the 5 board members on the new fund will be chosen by the US. It will have A shares and golden shares. America will receive all the royalties until Ukraine has paid off at least 100 billion of war debt to the US. Now it's called debt, with 4% interest added, less the 350 billion floated earlier by Trump, but still less than that, but still half of Ukraine's GDP and are unpayable. Ukraine only has B shares and will receive 50% of the royalties only once its arrears are paid off. The fund is registered in Delaware, but under New York jurisdiction. The US has a first right of refusal on all projects. It has authority to examine the books and accounts of any Ukrainian ministry or agency whenever it wants during working hours. And just finally, the US can veto sales of Ukraine's resources to other countries, which might mean banning rare earth sales to China, but might also restrict sales to Europe. Professor Riley said, quote, "It's not compatible with EU membership, and perhaps that is part of the purpose. I have to wonder whether the real intention might not be to force Zelensky to reject it. The US pays in no investment capital, deeming its contribution to be past military aid. No security guarantee is offered." And I'll leave it there just because you don't want to hear me bang on too much. But my goodness, that's insane. And to join Daniel Smith, who joined us on the trip out to Ukraine, Jonathan, I'm going to have a drink.
Okay. it is worse actually than my initial take, and my initial take was pretty bad. Unfortunately, it does align with something that we talked about and the last couple of live streams, which sounded extremely conspiratorial. Even when I was saying it, I was like, well, this seems like it might be true, but it seems far too conspiratorial to be true. And that was that Trump, behind the scenes, is conspiring to essentially annex Ukraine, to divide it up like a kind of Molotov-Ribbentrop pact, or the equivalent in terms of resources, translating that military pact into his understanding, which is, transactional, physical deal. This is exactly that thing. This is the thing we were talking about. This is not a minerals deal. This isn't even extortion. This is an annexation of Ukraine, or attempt to do that, in partnership with Putin. This is the worst case that we outlined and said that it could be a possibility several weeks ago. And I know many people would have thought, oh, hang a second, these guys, they're cynical. They've been watching this a little bit too closely. Now, come on now, this is the US. We don't do things like this. This is pure and simple an imperial move that is leveraging a genocidal war. And also note, because I want to link this and see what your thoughts are, it's no coincidence that for the first time during the Trump presidency, there has been the mention of nuclear weapons once again earlier this week. So on the one hand, you've got this deal. It's not a deal, it's a capitulation. On the other hand, we might stand back while Russia nukes you if you turn us down. Now, I'm not saying they're going to do that, but this seems to be the carrot and the stick. In fact, it's two sticks and no carrot.
And of course, that's in contravention of the Budapest Memorandum, which would be highly controversial. They can't stand back. They've literally contracted to, yeah. But I think the problem is with the Ukraine war at the moment, with the activity of the US, is that it's just really fertile ground for conspiracy theorizing, isn't it? It's like you start thinking in really cynical terms of like, your 4D chess, or this happening, or that, or they're doing this because of this, and you start, second guessing, and then thinking.
But it's not a conspiracy if it's true. It's not a conspiracy if just literally days later, the very worst case you outline actually happens, and here it is in black and white. This is incontrovertible. This is an annexation document. It is not a trade deal or any kind of security document, because there are no security guarantees whatsoever in this.
No, so I think you start being able to understand things a little better when you start with the premise that the US, and when I say the US, I mean the Trump administration, of course, the US doesn't give a shit about Ukraine. So if you start with the premise that they are neither morally nor politically like engaged with the outcome of Ukraine, they don't care one iota for a just peace. They don't care one iota for. He keeps saying he's worried about people dying and this and that, but he's not. That's just
doesn't give a damn.
Virtue signaling, sort of, nonsense. This is purely about what the US can gain out of this situation. They don't care for Ukraine, and they don't care about Russia's moral. So where they don't empathize and sympathize with Ukraine, they also don't care for the moral reprehensible activities of Russia. So they're ambivalent towards both sides, and that just means they're looking at things going, right, well, therefore this is just a situation, so what can we gain from this situation, like we want to gain from any situation? And once you understand that, this deal makes kind of a lot of sense.
Well, also we have to say, well, what kind of area of business would that be applicable? Because again, when you're working in the service sector or the creative sector, you don't go into it to screw your partners, because you wouldn't have any partners, you wouldn't have any place in that industry. So let's not just label it as a business way of thinking. It's actually not. This is a mafia way of thinking. And there are not that many areas of business that function on pure muscle and extortion. I mean, there just aren't, because otherwise you wouldn't be in business. No one would do business with you, not in sort of sophisticated value-added industries. So you have to go to really cutthroat areas, let's say mafia-dominated real estate, extraction industries, hydrocarbons, to find this sort of muscle type game. So it's not a sophisticated way of doing business. I mean, yeah, I think it's important to put that in context, because many business people, I know many CEOs in tech industries will be looking at this and finding it's simply repulsive and appalling, and not a way they would enter into any kind of business partnership.
Well, yeah, I sometimes feel a bit bad because, if you watch me all day, every day, then what I'm going to say now is, because I've already heard this 57 times, right?
Yeah.
And we've no doubt talked about this already. But like you said, Trump is like a real estate mogul, and he approaches international geopolitics with his New York real estate mafia mogul hat on. And in that transactional way, this makes sense, which is, right, we're doing a deal. I don't care for Ukraine, because Ukraine is a competitor like Russia is a competitor, but I can actually use Russia to engorge my pocket more than I can Ukraine, but actually I can use Ukraine as well. So I want to open Russia up to get these trade deals coming in, but I also know that Ukraine is on its knees, and I can just bend Ukraine over a barrel and take advantage of Ukraine and extract and extort out of Ukraine like a mafia boss would. I'm extorting through some kind of quasi protection racket all of your natural resources, and then I'm just making money out of Russia and making money out of Ukraine. Jobs are good.
Racket is the right word for it. It's not a business deal. This is extortion. This is a racket. This is actually profiting from genocide, pure and simple, profiting from the trauma and weakness of a victim country. Because again, we cannot, this situation should not be normalized in the way of, let's look at it as a business. It's not. Governments should not and cannot run as businesses. They must be based on something other than that, on frameworks, processes, values. I would say even things that are inherited, sort of culture and ways of doing things. Well, of course, Trump has, and Musk, who is his lackey in this, have shown absolutely no respect for any institution or what may have preceded it. And of course, they've shown absolute contempt for any lives that may be damaged in the process. And that includes Americans, whether they be, white, black, brown, yellow, or whatever. They've already shown absolute contempt. So this should not come as a surprise. The key question is, this deal is so bad. They cannot surely believe that Ukraine is so weak that it would accept it. So either they want them to reject it, or they've got other tools up their sleeve that they think will persuade Ukraine to accept it. That could include a new Russian offensive. It could include the threat to blow up the Zaporizhia GES, the nuclear power station. It could be a renewed threat of nuclear weapons. So either they're expecting a rejection, or they think they've got something up their sleeve, that an offer Ukraine cannot refuse, to use the sort of mafia parlance.
This is exactly what I was going to say. So you're great minds think alike, Jonathan. Two Jonathans thinking entirely alike. It's going to be boring listening to us, right? But like, you're exactly right. So you've got when you're sitting down and writing this document, like, unless you're really stupid, you're going to be predicting what the response is going to be, right? And you're thinking, okay, there's going to be some realization that either they're going to reject this, in which case you're planning them to reject this, and therefore that your advantage is in Ukraine rejecting this. So if you know Ukraine are going to reject it, that's therefore what you want. So what do you get? What do the US get out of Ukraine rejecting this? Then they can blame Ukraine, and then they can side with Russia maybe more overtly, and then open up trade with Russia and punish Ukraine by opening up trade with Russia and justifying that on Ukraine's intransigence. So that's or something like that, or like you said, they're going to accept it because they're forced to accept it. So what is it that the US, and I keep asking this, what is it that US have over Ukraine that they think that Ukraine will be forced to accept such a terrible deal? Is it because if they don't accept it, the US will just side with Ukraine, like side with Russia, like I just talked about, open up those trade routes and reduce all the sanctions? Is it some kind of safety that they have control over? Do the US have intelligence that protects Kiev from ballistics? If the Ukrainians refuse to do the trade, the minerals deal, that suddenly Kiev is now going to get ballistic missiles hitting it left, right, and center. What is it? So, exactly like you say, I think there are two options here, and both of them are forms of extortion.
They are
not good for Ukraine.
Yeah. No, they're not good for Ukraine at all. And of course, they must also be figuring here that this is a deal too far for Europe, because not only does it pointedly disadvantage Ukraine in a way that Europe, and especially Britain and France, are bound to turn around and say, "Now, hang on a second, this is appalling. Don't accept this. We can offer you a better deal, and we can offer you more support and more security, and not on extortionate terms like these." As well as this idea that it would invalidate Ukraine's bid to enter the EU. Now that I imagine that's a clause crafted in Moscow. I mean, there's no question there. That's far too smart. I mean, Trump doesn't really, I think, care whether Ukraine ends up in the EU or not, but Moscow absolutely does. That's why Yanukovych was, told to reject that, which was the initiator of Maidan. So this is a pure Kremlin point to try and make Ukraine impossible to join the Union. But they must also know that Europe will not advise Ukraine to do this, and actually that what we can expect is an uptick in European support for Ukraine with the US pulling such a move. They must anticipate this. Therefore, it must fall within their calculus that however they possibly come to threaten Ukraine, Europe will also be threatened similarly, or using other tools like tariffs, for instance. I mean, the prospect of this are terrifying. Maybe I should let you get a word in edgeways, but I did have a conversation earlier today with a fantastic Ukrainian expert in disinformation. And this is a topic we should probably come to either here or another episode. And this is that Trump's actions are almost certainly leading to not only a recession, but may well trigger a economic depression. Maybe the first, depression triggered by a single figure, as opposed to events in history, or from my recollection. And of course, you'd think, why on earth would anyone do that? Why on earth would anyone do that? Well, the one place, the one group of people in the world who'd be quite happy to see a worldwide depression. It's not Beijing, by the way. It's not Beijing at all. They'll be terrified of the prospect of that. It is, of course, Moscow, because they've tried to trigger this before. In 2008, during the global financial crisis, it has been said, I saw some interviews with senior US, so bankers and treasury officials, that actually Moscow went to Beijing, and they were like, "Well, come on, let's all get together and recall US debt. Let's crash the dollar, destroy the US as the international standard currency, as it were, universal currency. Let's bring this whole edifice down." And of course, the Chinese at that point turned around and just basically said, you're mad. We're not having a part of that, because that would kill the Chinese economy. I mean, that is as true today as it was then. I mean, the Chinese economy would be in even direr straits than it currently is if that plan was to come to pass. But the one place in the world that doesn't really care, because its people will not rise up, and most of the Russian population live in a fairly, I would say, hand-to-mouth fashion anyway, and it's got, and
they're already sanctioned to the hilt.
They're already sanctioned to the hilt. They've got their grey fleet. They've got their illegal hydrocarbons that's bringing enough to keep them alive, and they've got a certain amount of self-sufficiency when it comes to food and materials. They're the only country in the world who really don't give a damn if the world goes into depression. But what that will do is trigger a tidal wave of political extremism around the world, which of course they see as something they can manipulate.
See, I would disagree that Trump has that in mind. I don't think
Oh, he
he's
doesn't know, but he
no,
could be
no.
manipulated into
Yeah,
doing it. You know?
yeah, because there was, I mean, there are certain things that he wants. I mean, he loves the fact that he says tariff is the most beautiful word in the English language, and he loves it, and it's amazing. Is like, well, tariffs can be useful in strategic usage, but essentially across the board tariffs in an interconnected globalist world where now we have multinational companies, when
Yeah,
production takes place across borders, then tariffs actually can be really divisive, and they're essentially going to be, recessionary, and
yes, yeah,
therefore, it is. Yeah, he's doing lots of things that are going to damage his own economy.
yeah,
Now you can ask whether that's as a result of manipulation, but I think there's an awful lot of just a kind of poor sense of how macroeconomics works, and
oh
kind
yeah,
of wanting to be the strong man, wanting to be an emperor or a dictator, really, just like Putin, and etc. etc. And it's all and all of this falls into Putin's hands. And like we talked about before, there's an element of alignment, there's an element of useful idiots, there's an element of potentially being an asset, and all this kind of stuff. There's a comment someone made earlier pertaining to
yeah.
the minerals deal. Rock Butcher, which I love. Yeah, as a mining professional, and his name is Rock Butcher, of course, I can assure you that this whole minerals deal is completely ludicrous on so many levels. It will never happen. If by magic it did, it would take Ukraine 1,000+ years to pay back. So one thing that some people are saying is that Ukraine might sign up to this, knowing that it's not really going to come to fruition for many years, and hopefully a new government will come in and then say, by the way, maybe a democratic administration will come in and say, yeah, that sucks and it was evil, and we'll roll that back.
Wow.
That
Trouble
is
with
one
that one
theory.
is this deal is so bad, it would quite possibly trigger a new Maidan. I mean, Zelensky probably,
He
possibly,
wouldn't
rather,
he wouldn't be able to pass
couldn't
it.
survive signing such a thing. No, it wouldn't pass. He couldn't get it past the parliament. It would ruin his political standing if he tried, even with this sort of slightly tortured logic, like, let's sign this thing because we never expect to have to deliver on it. Now, that goes against everything he is, everything he does, and everything he says. He seems to be addicted to telling the truth, even where it does
Mm.
considerable harm to his position publicly. I'm not actually going to condemn
How
him for
dare
that,
he be a
because
man of integrity?
yes, how dare you tell the truth and not tell barefaced lies for self-gain? But no, I think he's one of the few people in the world who's prepared to do that, and as such, he is that dam holding back the sort of the tidal wave of lies and filth. But no, this would destroy, that would destroy him. I think personally, it would also destroy his political career. So I also don't think it would be good. I think it would start to sour support for Ukraine. Not in the sense that people would start to see Ukraine as unjust, but I think it would engender a state of despair, because it demonstrates a certain capitulation to absolute evil, and that despair is not what we need at this point. Especially as there are other stories that are being crowded out by all this Trump nonsense, which is that Ukraine's armed forces are not on the point of collapse. They're weathering
No.
terrible suffering, but actually their military strength is growing, according to one analyst, analysis I saw recently. That is in terms of the quality of kit, quality of training, and even the numbers are starting to turn around as well. And the Russian economy is moving from bad to worse. One of the largest
Mm.
enterprises, I'm going to talk to Constant about this in
Gazprom.
the next couple of days. Yeah, one of the largest enterprises is on the verge of bankruptcy. I mean, Gazprom won't go physically bankrupt because it's bankrolled by the state, but one of the largest property companies is potentially needing to be bailed out. There is an interesting report that shows that far more businesses were expropriated in the last couple of years than at any time since the Russian Revolution. This is not just external Western businesses, but internally, many businesses are being stolen and handed over to Trump and to Putin loyalists in exchange for money to try and keep the economy going. And now Russia is seeking to sell off chunks of its state assets. These are the things that Putin wanted to rip out of the hands of the oligarchs, and he did not want these to be in private hands. He wanted the state to be able to control them and utilize the wealth from them. Well, they're now being forced, because of their liquidity crisis, to start selling off chunks of their state assets. They are screwed. If it wasn't for Trump, they really would be on the ropes. And despite his best efforts to save them, they probably still are in a great deal of trouble.
And the head of the Bank of Russia, remember, in December said in March, it may well be the case that we're going to have to freeze retail bank accounts and monies, and that caused everyone to panic. And then they came out and denied that was going to be the case. But if that is something that is going to happen at some point soon, then that will be an absolute disaster. So yeah. You're right. It's a very different reality and I talked about this morning in one of my videos that in fact, no, not this morning. I think it's in my military aid video that I'm yet to release, but it's the doom posting of these mainstream media outlets often talk, and indeed the American administration that talks about, Trump himself says, most of the cities are in rubble, and the thousands of Ukrainians are surrounded, and woe is Ukraine, woe is Ukraine. And actually, no, they're doing all right, thank you, given it's 3 years into the war and the front line's held, and actually they're pushing back at the moment. I mean, I do wonder whether the Russians are going to bring to bear a significant force that they've been mustering up in the Kursk region and maybe elsewhere, but nonetheless, things are looking okay. And with enough support, Russia would be in real trouble. The foot was on the neck of the Russian economy and the Russian military, and Trump came into power and took that foot off. And here we are now.
Yes,
so it's
precisely
really
true. That's precisely true.
Almost what you're saying, with like so much bandwidth has been strangled by talk about Trump. I mean, there is a comment here from someone, Terracon, saying, why waste time talking about this? I mean, that's a minerals deal. It's just a pointless background running commentary thing about the distant future. The problem is, like,
it's not though.
It's not though, because actually this is reflective of the relationship between the US and Ukraine. And actually, that is what's possibly going to define the outcome of this war. I mean, people often say, why do you spend so much time talking about Trump? Well, because he's the president of the US and they hold the future of Ukraine to some significant degree in their hands. Now, the question is, how much is Europe going to stand up and be counted? And that's kind of where we're going to go on to now.
I want to give that question a passionate response. Let me, I don't mean to troll this individual who wrote that. But look at this historically. You are seeing two of the largest and most powerful empires in history. I mean, obviously, Russia isn't at the height of its power. The USSR.
That looks like a picture. Sorry, that looks like a picture of Pierre. I wonder if that's Pierre changing his name. So this won't. But anyway, carry on.
Yes, I don't mean to be mean to Pierre, because I love having a robust debate with Pierre if it is him. But here you have, the USSR is on its second, I would say, phase of collapse. It's already, had one major disintegration and is now entering a second. But it is one of the largest empires in history. It's certainly the largest land empire and one of the most malicious empires in history. I mean, it's the mechanic behind it is absolutely grotesque. It's not an inheritor of Greek or Roman civilization. It's absolutely something other. It's not an inheritor or a cousin or a brother or a partner or any of this other stuff of either Northern or Southern European civilization. It is a rapacious civilization that copies and assimilates and genocides in order to build itself up. That isn't a process of a huge historical process of collapse, in my view. And here you have the US, which was easing out of its imperial, luster and greatness, and on, I would say, its declining phase. But that could have taken many decades, if not a century or so. Now, Trump has pressed the fast forward button on this. So you have two of the largest empires in history that are collapsing at the same time. So when you say, well, why are we paying attention to that, and why are we paying attention to this, and why so much, talk about Russia and this? We're seeing a massive historical process unfold, and unfortunately, when empires come apart, they tend to create bloody, tsunamis or rifts in their wake. And when you're talking about two of the largest empires in history and most powerful, it's an incredibly scary prospect.
Yeah, and if so, I mean, Pierre, if that is Pierre, he had said in a private chat with me earlier, and in fact, you, Jeff, you're on this one as well. I've never taken too much notice of the minerals deal, simply because that by the time it would come into effect, a new administration or direction would reverse it. So that's what we talked about earlier. And if not, we'll all be effed anyway, living in some Orwellian dystopia, which it
Yeah, well,
absolutely
that
agree with that.
yes,
But
yes,
the
I agree with
problem
that. Yeah,
the problem is the reality of if Ukraine refuse this minerals deal, which I think we all expect they will do and certainly should do, then what are the US going to do? So it goes back to, well, if they planned for them refusing this deal, then this is a way of punishing Ukraine and then having a justification for punishing Ukraine. And that then is an issue. We need to pay attention to this, because it's going to lead to further divergence of the US away from Europe, and further seeing Ukraine as the enemy and Russia
yes.
as the aligned ally. And in fact,
Well, yeah. And they won't just
ju-
punish them; they'll punish the EU as well. They'll punish
well,
EU
yeah,
and Britain along with it.
that's why I was going to just bring this in. So the Independent article talking about the coalition of the willing meeting today with the 30 plus European leaders and delegations with Zelensky, is the title of the Independent is "The Coalition of the Willing Summit in Paris proved that the US and Europe are an ocean apart." Now, obviously, that's yes, literally, but metaphorically, we really are on in a very different place in the US, and that's kind of, there's your segue into talking about the coalition of the willing meeting. But yeah, I think it's absolutely right that it's very clear that the US has it's interesting that Kieswetter, one of the allies of Friedrich Merz, a really big pro-Ukrainian member of parliament in Germany, has come out today and said formally the US has changed sides. So you're now starting to hear big politicians in Europe be very explicit about how the US literally seems to have changed sides. And so really it is down to Europe to stand up. And then that seems to be probably because Friedrich Merz is yet to be formally made chancellor. It's coming down to Emmanuel Macron and Keir Starmer, and these two are having their time in history. I really think it's fascinating seeing today, and I talked about this in a video earlier, the very warm embrace of both Macron and Zelensky and Starmer and Zelensky. There is clearly a camaraderie there. There is a safe space in Europe for Ukraine. And this is also a statement of juxtaposition against the US. Is there anything you want to say about that?
Yes, I mean this is part of this process because Russia, as part of its historical view, only sees China and the US as peer powers. So of course it wants to have these conversations on so-called, deals and peace and ceasefire and whatever with the US because it fits Russia's perception of itself. I am feeling a little bit better. Thank you, Johnny. Very kind. So that's kind of logical why they'd want to do that. It's a sort of status and power play. But there's another reason behind this as well, because they think of Europe as a secondary, not even an empire. They think of it as this collection of states. In fact, they think of it a collection of half states, because in their mind, European countries have surrendered part of their sovereignty and pooled it in this entity, which comes to consensus decisions. Russians don't understand that. They don't understand it. They don't like it. They don't think it's real. It's just this thing. And when they can't understand it, they're simply going to label it as inferior. So it's an entity that stands up to Russia. It's an entity that feels itself to be more powerful. And actually, the EU, I would imagine, feels it has greater status than Russia because of the size of its economy. But it does not have the military and either the will to use the economic power, translate that into military power, and it doesn't have, let's say, the executive focus to be able to sort of deliver a punch. So Russia sees, I mean, quite honestly, Russia sees Europe in the same way that a lion would see, you know, a little, I don't know, lemming or something just accidentally wandering into its cage, you know, a juicy little morsel. That's what it sees Europe as, ready to gobble up. And it's a hungry lion. The rib cage is showing through the flesh, and this lovely little, let's call it a sheep, this lovely little sheep accidentally, you know, gets directed into the wrong pen. That's how they look at us. I mean, it
But
really is.
I often wonder about this because the Russian population is at the most 140 million. There are some saying that actually it's arguably much less than that, and the figures aren't accurate, and people have left, and blah blah blah. And you're thinking, well, if Europe say 550 million people, and you're thinking, yeah, we can gobble these guys up, and the European economy is much greater than Russia. The European military together is much greater than Russia's, and the population is much greater. Then, like, it's this weird, like, fallacy of invincibility that they appear to have.
What you're looking at is extraordinary. I would call it arrogance. I mean, for the first time in Russia's history, as part of their sort of defense doctrines and now their educational programs, they are referring to themselves as a civilization apart from others, a civilization unique in history. And you have this extraordinary imperial arrogance. You know, let's face it. I mean, the British had it, and the English, to an extent, have a certain unconscious arrogance. Especially if you're Scottish, Welsh, or Irish, you're going to see it. If you're English, you might not quite see it quite so much.
I don't think you'll find it's not unconscious, Jonathan. It's not unconscious.
Okay, it's not unconscious, but it's not in that full flush of imperialism, and you know we can have a laugh about it, of course. But Russia is in the full flow of this, I would say, sort of imperial arrogance. If you were to take the most objectionable, you know, characters in Nazi Germany, if you were to take the most objectionable imperialists from the British Raj or whatever, those are the kind of attitudes that are, I would say, unfortunately, common even amongst certain elements of the Russian opposition. This is not a country that has the same values. It's not at the same stage of history. Now, if you look on paper, there seems to be no match between the EU and Russia, but they don't think of it like that. They're not looking at it like a balance sheet. They're looking at it in terms of what they would think of civilizational and, don't laugh too loudly, moral values. They look at Europe and they think it is decadent. They think it is beyond its prime. It's a civilization that is on the point of collapse. We look at them and we think of them on the point of collapse. They look at us and they think we are spent and wasted and gone and not willing to defend either our values or even our lives. That is how they can, I think, have these unrealistic ideas of conquering Europe. Now, we know that there's plenty of strength left in Europe, and plenty of civilization and plenty of morality as well. But unfortunately, they just seem to have imbibed a little too much of their own, genocidal propaganda.
Well, yeah, that's it. I mean, I think the Russians do have a tendency to believe their own lies, and I think there's a greater sense of reality, probably due to freedom of information and freedom of speech and press in Europe, that we have a slightly more realistic sense of what's going on and who we are and who they are. But what's just utterly bizarre is that it's become so overt that the US appears to have, or the US administration appears to have aligned so much. I mean, it's really interesting listening to Jim Hines, who's a ranking member on the Intelligence Committee. He's a Democratic senator, but he was saying, and he said, look, here's a report on the threats for this year and whatever. This was only yesterday, and he'd given Tulsi Gabbard a hard time in the hearing, and he's like, it appears that we have just I forget his phraseology, but essentially said we've just got into bed with Russia. Like, what is going on here? Like, so when you've got half of the American political establishment and you've got most of Europe saying that the US appears to have changed sides, then I think we're well justified now in saying that the US has changed sides. Like, literally, they are supportive of Russia. And the EU has to come together. And the problem is there are still, like, even though Ursula von der Leyen's rearm Europe or readiness 2030 or whatever you want to call it, with 150 billion euros plus moving up to maybe 800 billion euros, and there's still like Italy and Spain and potentially even France getting in the way of this happening at the time where we need complete unity. That's really frustrating, because I was thinking a week ago, Europe, really are standing up. Now I'm already thinking, well, there are some issues. But then today, the coalition are willing. I think you've got a good sense of unity back again. You've got aid. So even if they haven't agreed a full-on European way forward at the moment, there are European nations who are really stepping up. So you've had France actually with a 2 billion euro arms package yesterday announced. You've got Norway just going absolutely nuts at the moment. You've got the Nordic nations in general, Sweden and obviously Denmark, Finland, and the Baltics. They are really stepping up. The UK trying to do everything it can, but we're financially pretty screwed at the moment. But you've got Starmer at the center of it all, and you've had Zelensky saying that France and the UK are going to represent Europe in negotiations going forward. That's, from my own personal nationalistic point of view, that's really good news. It's great to see the UK back in Europe playing a really important part, and it's good to see Macron. I was thinking he was one of the only people that could do this, and he was looking really good. Then the European elections came along and it all went wrong for him, like politically, or for France. But actually at that time he was being super strong, and he's now back to being super strong. So there's some real positives for Europe, but we have to seize the opportunity.
Yeah, I've got some, a friend who's commenting, who knows a lot more about sort of European strengths and European politics than I do, and I think he's sort of putting some detail on what we said. Is that the Russian assumption is that Europe is far weaker than it actually is, and and they also assume that because of gender identity issues, somehow we have fallen apart. And of course, those issues, whether, whatever merits those arguments have, it's a minority issue in every society. It involves a small minority of people. It doesn't affect the armed forces, the effect of the armed forces. And of course, what we know from history is that certainly Britain, when push comes to shove and there's a crisis, we might not be brilliantly prepared when the crisis kicks off, but we tend to get our act together. So I think his point was that if Russia thinks it can just stroll into Europe, and how divergent that is from reality doesn't mean they won't do it, because they walked into Ukraine with a full-scale invasion, but with far too few troops to deliver on the plan that they had, and the plan was kind of bonkers. They did that against what any military planner would say is a reasonable reality. So there's nothing to say they won't pull another, absolutely insane kind of stunt, especially if they feel that the US has genuinely flipped sides. But they will get a seriously bloody nose, I think, was the point of my friend who's been texting wildly reams and lists of Europe's military capabilities, but also whatever we have or haven't got, whether we underestimate or overestimate, probably overestimate our stocks and the serviceability of the equipment that we've got, and the sort of, the capabilities that we have when they actually come to a firefight. The fact is that in a crisis, we will I think sort of dust off those production lines pretty damn quickly and work with places like Turkey, South Korea, Japan, and so on to restock them. Here's one I wanted, before I forget. Erdogan, it's all kicking off in Turkey. And the coincidence of that makes me think, do you know what? Standing up to Russia, why is it that when someone stands up to Russia, things catch fire and things start to go wrong and your society starts to look a little bit unstable?
No, I think I wouldn't connect that to Russia. I think that is classic Erdogan establishing. So what he did with what's his name, Imamoglu or whatever it is, his rival, who was the mayor of Istanbul, he put him in prison. But this is a long time in coming. So he's arrested him, but he'd done things like removed his. So in order to become president of Turkey, you have to have a university qualification. So that's one of their stipulations. And they got the University, I think, of Istanbul to remove the qualifications for this guy. I mean, so, this has been Erdogan like putting the steps in place. And it's interesting as well with the control over the press they have. Even though there are like gazillions of people marching in Istanbul, there are apparently people in Istanbul that aren't even aware of this or haven't been. It's all been through word of mouth. And so, this is classic Erdogan doing inching away at further, getting towards more and more autocracy in a way that Trump is going to be looking at going, that's what I want. He loves Erdogan, he loves Viktor Orban, and both of these two rulers are to an extent peas from a pod, although Erdogan is much more savvy about Russia and the relationship of Ukraine with Russia, whereas Viktor Orban, you're on mute by the way, mate, but Viktor Orban is just far more of a Putin wannabe.
I'm not sure you could even compare the two. I mean, yes, the mechanics of how they
it's the mechanics.
That's the mechanics of capturing the state is of
Yeah.
course similar. But in terms of their stature and their genuine power, I mean, it's almost incomparable. I mean, they're both quite good at trashing their own country's economy because of lack of real understanding of macroeconomics and the sort of subtleties of that, as well as the rampant nepotism, which of course is bound to bring your economy to a pretty bad place. But Erdogan has genuine power, doesn't he? I mean, he's a genuine player.
Yeah.
Whereas Orban is just a sycophantic toad.
So Hungary doesn't have the power geopolitically that Turkey has. Turkey's very powerful for a bunch of reasons, and it has a large standing army and its position at the Bosphorus Straits, and as I keep saying, the crossroads of north and south, east and west, Islam, Christianity, secularism, Europe, Asia, Middle East, Africa. Turkey is there. Turkey is an incredibly important global player. And so they are very different. But I was talking about the mechanics there, and those are the mechanics that we are seeing being implemented in the United States at the moment to a staggering degree. And many people aren't particularly aware of quite the scope of what is going on underneath the radar in the United States, and some of it is truly scary. The attack on the judiciary, the attack on and by judiciary I don't just mean the judges, but I mean legal firms that are being targeted by the Trump administration, the attacks on the universities and the funding, Columbia University, all these things. These are classic. This is exactly what kind of Orban's done and Erdogan has done, and the control, the control from the top of the pyramid in the United States is only growing, and it is really scary. But there you go.
And this is what I was keen to sort of get a few characters on who could talk about it. I mean, it's not going to happen this week or next week, but I'm hoping to get Keir Giles back on to talk about this reflexive control, because I think actually examining this is I think really important. How
do you want to explain reflexive control?
Yes, reflexive control is but we spend a lot of time, don't we, arguing about whether Putin is controlling Trump, whether Trump is an agent or asset or whatever. But reflexive control is a little more subtle. It's designed to really manipulate your adversary into doing what you want, but giving them or allowing them to think that actually they are taking that decision, that they've come to their own point of view and they've analyzed their own information and come to that conclusion. Actually, you've manipulated the information, you've helped to manipulate the decision or their route towards that decision through various methodologies, but you retain or you allow them to keep the illusion that this is their choice, when in fact they've become a kind of marionette of yours. I mean, this I think is quite a powerful concept to explain what Trump is doing, because if we simply stick to the is he an agent kind of thing, then we just fall into a real partisan, sort of partisan sort of argument, and that doesn't solve anything. whereas reflective control is a core Soviet technique, which
Yeah, essentially
has only been refined.
You could euphemize that with useful idiot, right? So here's someone that's eminently easy to manipulate, and we are going to control their decisions given a particular circumstance, and then we're going to contrive this circumstance to come about in order to bring these people to decide to do this, and then they take ownership over that decision, and they don't think Russia's got anything to do with it, and actually it's exactly what Russia wanted to come about, but then they own
in
that.
Fact,
and
you can make the argument that almost every president has been reflexively controlled in some way, especially since the Cold War. Yeltsin was good at this, constantly threatening, or saying, it's going to collapse. You have to help me. You have to help me, rig the Russian electoral system so that I win and the communists don't. And actually, the West obliged. You have Putin's pulled that stunt multiple times. You could argue that Biden was under a form of reflexive control because they managed to use the nuclear threat to ensure that the US did not supply Ukraine in a timely fashion with what it needed to actually win, and then provided advice which actually blunted their possibility to win and push forward. So reflexive control isn't a sort of partisan thing that is only exercised on Trump. It's a core part of how Russia projects state power through psychological manipulation.
Literally chess playing, right? So we talk about 4D chess and all this all the time, but actually when you're playing chess, what you're trying to do is manipulate the other player into making a move that you want them to make, because you're thinking 5 moves ahead, and you're hoping that they're going to do this so that you can do that. Like, that is just, that is the geopolitical game of chess that we see played out. There's a thank you very much to Julian Rossiter, by the way, always a great supporter of the channel. Is there a line in the sand Republicans have that Trump will cross? This is a fascinating question. Anyone who still thinks the current administration will do the right thing needs to stop making excuses and wake up. Yeah, I fully agree. I think that's a given. Orange tosser to end that.
I've got a lot of arguments on that one. I mean, I basically put into the chat, and I've got a lot of I'd say American friends. They're comrades in this fight. They're pro-Ukrainian, but some of the Democrat side, many of them are actually GOP, and some of them are extraordinarily active. But I did, put a line into the chat. I said, look, we're all almost at the point now where you're either collaborator or you're part of the resistance. We're not too far
either
off that
for us or against us.
Yeah, that's it. If you're working the American system, even if you are an American citizen, full stop, there will come a point, and we were talking about how you actually define this, where you move from, we are critics and opponents of a democratically elected government, and we're working within an electoral process. In that respect, it would be entirely inappropriate to call for insurrection and to call people collaborators, especially people who, lifetime GOP and trying to work within the party to sort of change minds. It would be inappropriate while you're still in the framework of a democratic system, and where your electoral mandate hasn't been broken, and where your leaders are not conspiring with foreign powers to deconstruct your system. There must surely come a point, and I think this is what we're going to try and do. I'm going to think about it over the next week or so, but I've been trying to create a bingo scorecard of when you go from a transition, from a democracy transitioning to autocracy, and when you have fully fledged autocracy. When you have fully fledged autocracy, then the choice is you no longer have the choice to be a critic and opponent. You are either a dissident and in the resistance, or you are a collaborator, and your silence is tantamount to collaborating, unfortunately. I mean, that I would say that absolutely applies to every single Russian who lives in Russia. I would say that applies to every person who identifies as Russian outside of Russia as well. You're either fighting the tyranny that's taken over your country, or you are colluding with it. There is no neutrality. Neutrality simply helps evil to flourish. There will come a point, and that point is accelerating rapidly towards us, where I think we'll be able to say the same for the United States.
Well, it's fun. I think there's a tangential reference here to what you were saying. Crusader Damien, one of yours, super chats for you, felt for you guys the other day. So that was when Jonathan and I were chatting with Greg Terry and Prof.
Yeah.
Gertis. Some
Well, I
Americans
did
even.
some work. I did some thinking on this, Jonathan, because I sort of, I didn't want to. Yeah, I actually felt bad, and other people were like they felt for us. I felt a little bit bad for the prof there, and actually I wanted to understand his position. So I went away, and I didn't actually sleep that night because this really troubled me a lot. And using ChatGPT, I've produced like a 50-page document listing all the checks and balances, all the ways in which they've been challenged, and all the characteristics of the major authoritarian and hybrid authoritarian regimes over the last 20 years. Listed them all out so I could capture everything. And I started to put together a bingo scorecard. I think I'm now in the conclusion that the US is transitioning, and it's showing clear signs of transitioning towards autocracy. But it doesn't even tick all the transitional boxes. And certainly it's not an established autocracy. So in some ways, I kind of feel the challenge that the prof has articulated there, because it's a process
But we
in
talked about that.
train. It
We
hasn't yet
said
succeeded fully.
no, but I don't think anyone said it had. Like, that was
Mm.
literally part of our conversation. That's why I said there's a difference between saying he's a tyrant and he's tyrannical. So,
Yes,
so
yes.
that do you remember that? It's like
Yeah.
he wants to be a tyrant and he's doing all the things. So it might not be that all boxes are ticked, but all boxes have started to be ticked. Do you know what I mean? Like
Oh,
they're,
yes,
they're
yeah, that's true. Yeah.
there are inches here and inches there in every single different category, where the US is, or where Trump and the Project 2025 crew are trying to gain more and more power. And
Yeah.
if you don't stand up and shout about it now, you'll be like we talked about on the night. You'll be the frog boiling in the pot, and at some point you've got to jump out the pot and say, I have a feeling this pot's going to bloody well boil, and if I don't jump out now, I'm a dead frog, right? So,
Yeah.
but yeah,
And
it's
actually it's
just as,
happening at terrifying speed, right? This isn't just
and
a
it really
slow,
is, yeah.
you know.
There are experts that have said this is happening way quicker than places like, say, Erdogan. Erdogan's been in power for an awful long time, right? And
Yeah. Yeah.
he's been doing things like this to create like a decades long, like several decades long, like march towards autocracy. And Turkey is still in that hybrid place, right? The US has had like literally 8 weeks, like
Yeah. Yeah.
8 weeks, and already people are like. So yeah, the speed, and that's what's particularly worrying. But anyway, Crusader Damien says even professors don't just understand what's at the US helm. Keep up the great work. So thank you for that, Crusader Damien. But yeah, that was a good faith dialogue, and I know Prof. Gertis got a lot of, in my threads, got a lot of hassle for his positioning. But it's really important that we have these discussions, and it's really important that we don't like not have them because we disagree with other people, and that we have these good faith discussions. Like, as long as there's good faith dialogue and not like trollish dialogue where there's just intransigence to the point of the other person is like pretty much trolling, and that's not what was happening. So
No, it absolutely isn't. And this is why what I'd love to do is to get DW on, because of course he actually is an
DW
attorney. He can
Phillips.
actually DW Phillips, because he can talk to some of the legalistic basis for these things. I'd like to get Mark Toth, who is a recognized political author, and highly critical of much of what the Trump does. But all these people are conservatives, by the way. I mean, also Joe Lindsley, who's working within the system to try and change the narrative internally within the GOP, and get Greg. And so I'd like to have this mega panel and then present my bingo scorecard to them. I know it's utterly trivial, but I think it's quite a useful mental exercise to say, okay, here are all the transitional elements of the slide towards autocracy, right? And these are mapped from multiple countries, including Philippines, Georgia, etc. These are all the transitional processes. This is what it looks like when autocracy becomes entrenched. Now, not every country has every single one of these ticked, but here they all are, captured in a transitional and established board, bingo card. Let's agree on which boxes the US ticks, and let's actually put a few other countries in there, for comparison, Britain and so on. because they'll often point to things like, yeah, but hang a second, Britain's not perfect because we have introduced extraordinary laws that discriminate peaceful protest and the right to assembly that was brought in by a Conservative government. Terrible laws which should be appealed and terrible police practice. There is this constant refrain from the right, especially in the US, but I've seen many people use this one, which unfortunately, I mean, Russians would love this because they see their own talking points being reflected and amplified, that we don't have freedom of speech in Britain because, you know, if people use social media for hate speech, yet the police might actually turn up and arrest you. You know, if you troll people and stalk people and threaten to kill them, you know, funnily enough, that's illegal. That doesn't come under the remit of free speech. But this is very much used to say, but you know, you call yourself a democracy, but you're not really, and blah 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 blah. Well, let's map some of these transitional features. And you will actually find that quite a few European democracies have a few transitional features in there. But having a couple is something I think you can kind of deal with if you're a healthy democracy, and hopefully roll back. When the lights are blinking, you know, like a submarine that's been hit with a depth charge, then you've got a few problems. And I think that's what we'll see when we do this, you know, dictatorship bingo card on the US.
Yeah, yeah. I agree. The only thing I'd say, like when you have too many people on a panel, it becomes really difficult. I mean, that's just my. I always want to. If something's in my head, it's got to come out. So I'm always wanting to speak, right?
Maybe I
But
do too, because there's a lot of people there, right? There's a lot of
yeah,
people I could bring onto that.
yeah. It was just. Did I star it? Maybe I haven't just starred it. I meant to star it. I think it was Cheryl that was just saying. Just talking back to about Prof. Gerdes, he needs to read Timothy Snyder's On Tyranny, and I think that's an absolute must for reading, especially if you read the updated version, which is On Tyranny on Ukraine. Or I don't know. I was just looking down. I think he might have
I think it
changed the
is. He's
name
not.
of
He's
it.
not a favourite with the old right wing. They're really laying into him like big time, especially the
Yeah.
trolls. Um,
But On Tyranny is an absolute masterpiece piece of a book,
yeah,
and the
it is.
expanded audio edition On Tyranny, updated with 20 lessons from Russia's war on Ukraine. That's the one to listen to because he
Oh,
then
I'll
applies it. He applies
get
it to
that.
Ukraine, and it is really, really good to listen to. And it's almost conversational. Like I was wondering whether he's actually written it or whether he was just talking, like the second part. But like, yeah, it's really, really
He's a
good.
busy
Timothy
man.
Snyder.
You know,
Yeah,
I wouldn't
he
blame
is.
him if he did that. Absolutely. Um, I'm gonna while you're chatting away there, I'm gonna go and order that for myself because that's
Yeah, really good. But make sure you
really
get
need to listen
the
to that.
Ukraine one. That is the expanded version. But yeah, so yeah, let's just do a couple of super chats. Here's one from Putin Puppet. Why singing that minerals deal with completely nothing in return? Why sign that minerals deal with completely nothing in return? Is it only a Ukrainian delaying tactic with nothing return? Trump Trump hasn't any leverage over Ukraine. GOP is now the Kim Jong Un party. Well, so this is kind of what we're talking about, Putin Puppet. Like, why
Great
sign it?
metaphor,
Is it a delaying tactic? So, for Ukraine's point of view, I'm wondering whether the whole negotiations with the US are delay tactics to get Europe involved and give Europe time to sort their shit out. So possibly you could make an argument that Ukraine is saying, yes, sir, okay, we'll do this. Okay, let's do that. Russia comes on board. They know that Russia probably aren't going to sign up to this. So it looks like we're really keen, but Russia aren't going to play ball. They're going to put out loads of conditions. And then it extends this process on for a long time. Maybe the same with a minerals deal. What's a point that I meant to make earlier, Jonathan, was that actually, if you look at the history of the minerals deal, the original minerals deal was terrible. Then the reworked minerals deal that Ukraine had
yeah.
rejigged was
Much better
really
the
good,
reworked.
much
Yeah, it was a
better.
good one. Yeah.
Then loads of people reacted to that, I think, in public and said, well, this is good, much better for Ukraine. And then the US kind of picked up on that. This is my speculation, and went,
Yeah.
oh shit, actually, this is too nice for Ukraine.
Yeah.
We need to go and rework that. And now they've come up with this, and it's back to the idea that actually either we are planning on Ukraine not being able to sign it, or we have so much over them that they are forced to sign that. And that's where we're at. It's one of those two options.
I think
or
it's playing for time. I really do think it's
but from a Ukraine point of view?
time. From a Ukraine point of view, and that's for two reasons. One is waiting for Russia to overreach, waiting for them to commit some horrific crime on the theory that either the US will go, oh, that's terrible, which they won't because Trump actually doesn't care, or that the US public might, or that Europe will say this is a step too far. So on the one hand, they're waiting for Russia, give Russia enough rope to hang themselves. The second one, of course, is just if they can agree with Macron and Starmer to just buy a couple of weeks for Europe to get its act together, then and possibly collate enough special forces to have some presence on the ground. I think we're rapidly moving to that point where there's no point anymore talking about the backstop for the US. There's no point waiting for some kind of consensus to emerge. I very much hope our leaders are now dealing directly with Ukraine and looking to get something ready to go on the ground so they can literally stick two fingers up at the Yanks and the Russians.
Well, that's really interesting you say that, because what came out of the Coalition of the Willing conference, for want of a better word, today was that there were three pillars. And the three pillars that Macron was talking about, see if I can find it. The three pillars that Macron was talking about did no longer include the backstop for the US giving security guarantees. So I don't know if you remember, but a few weeks ago, when European leaders were talking about what needed to be in place for European peacemakers to be peacekeepers to be on the ground in the US, there was always, and we need US security guarantees. And Macron came out today and said there are three pillars, and it said that Ukraine's army needs to be in a good place, our reassurance forces need to be doing a good job, and then we need to rearm Europe, right? And there wasn't a place for the US security backstop there, because I think it's now recognized that they ain't going to do it. Wall Street Journal brought out a piece that said it's all falling apart and Europe aren't going to be doing this, but I'm not sure that was a very accurate piece. I think they are putting things slowly in place that need to be done. They said today one of the things that the European leaders need to do, or delegations need to do is go back and work out the legality of providing peacekeepers. Now, I was kind of upset that hadn't already been done, but that those are the things that need to be put in place. So yeah,
absolutely. But on the same day, we have this 800 million European deal supposedly been blocked by, was it Portugal, Italy?
I think it's Italy,
France?
Spain, and
Right?
France.
Italy, Spain, and France. So my apologies to Portugal and my friends in Portugal who have been campaigning hard to do their bit. Again, I mean, that's not necessarily an anti-Ukraine move. I guess it's just sort of recognizing that actually these countries that have blocked the debt package have deep financial issues, which at the moment they're not able to go to their electorates or confident enough in their own sort of electoral strength to say, do you know what, we
yes
have
and
to
no.
Yes
and no. So Italy's interesting. They've got an interesting history with regard to the Communist Party and communists. Spain have also the similar, Spain, the Civil War, and Franco, and also they don't want to be too militaristic, knowing that they had 40 years of a military dictatorship. And so there are some saying that and if you look at the polls in Italy, are almost anomalous, as in they're very different in terms of how much the general public support Russia and Ukraine compared to the rest of Europe. And so, yes, you can argue that there is some economic rationale behind their obstinance, but actually there might be some complexities with Spain and Italy in particular. France will be more to do with budgets and whatnot, no doubt, and always wanting money to be spent in France and in Europe and blah, blah, blah. So the France are probably doing more what France do normally, but those other two countries, interesting. And also, the further you get away from Moscow, the less that people care so much about or recognize that Russia are the threat that they really are.
And some people are probably commenting, because I've added the thumbnail for this discussion now, and I specifically call it here, Reagan broke the USSR. Well, it wasn't him alone, and it wasn't entirely his effort, but essentially it's like This thing is evil, and it's done great evil in the world. This is absolutely true. The Soviet Empire was an absolute obscenity and a stain on history. And through the termination of the Western allies, really we helped that system to sort of fall apart and bankrupt itself through its military spending. Although, if we hadn't exerted that pressure, I wonder whether it wouldn't have collapsed anyway. But certainly, I think it's fair to say that Reagan played a role in breaking the USSR. And I've called this thumbnail "Trump is building it back." And people might think, it's just a flippant thumbnail thing. But there are multiple ways in which he's building it back up. He is preventing the ultimate collapse of Russia, which has reverted back to its imperial, partly to its imperial model of the USSR, but without some of the ideology. It's reverted to its imperial genocidal MO, modus operandi, as was there in Stalin's time. So by saving Russia, you are quite literally helping the survival of a psychology that was built and framed by the USSR. But more than that, Trump is introducing a way of thinking, an imperialistic way of thinking, a highly corrupt and nepotistic way of thinking, which is absolutely corrosive for freedom, corrosive for innovation, corrosive for capitalism. In fact, he is introducing that kind of corrupt, nepotistic model to the US. So it's a double sin. He's helping the USSR be rebuilt on Russian territory, and he is internalizing some of that model of the USSR mindset in the US, as well as part of its late stage sort of imperial collapse. So people might think this is hyperbole, but no, we have to start seeing Trump for what he is, an absolutely toxic and divisive figure who is helping the evil of the USSR come back into the world like a kind of zombie empire.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't realize that I still had the browser still showing everyone. I was just looking for latest polls because Mark from the Little Whiskey Shop, who came with us to Ukraine as well, he was just asking, it'd be interesting to see what the EU opinions are, and I have talked about that on my videos previously, and essentially there is very high support for Ukraine among the Nordics. Among UK is actually one of the strongest. I think the UK rates is one of the strongest in Europe in support for Ukraine after Poland. And the explanation that TLDR News do a good job of trying to explain why the UK support is so high. And part of it is because things like Litvinenko and Skripal, the poisonings in Europe, the culture of the Cold War, whereby we've known for a long time that Russia are our enemy. It's kind of like culture, James Bond, etc., that kind of thing. And so it's easy for us. We also, there's the idea that in British culture, we always like to support the underdog in like sports matches and stuff. And so Ukraine was seen. So there are lots of things that make it very easy for people in Europe to have this bipartisan support for Ukraine in a way that you don't see across Europe. And I think, once you start moving away from the Baltics and start moving down to like Southern Europe, that's where, the Financial Times did an article and looked at the distance from Moscow and the amount of support. Well, actually, the distance from Moscow and the amount of military aid that been given to Ukraine. And there's a real correlation that the closer you are to Moscow, and for understandable reasons, the more aid you're going to give to Ukraine. And therefore, I think by extension, probably the more support you are going to give for Ukraine in your general population. But I'll try and dig out the actual polls. That there have been plenty done.
Yeah, and that was something I wanted to ask you, because it seems that Zelensky, even after, especially after the humiliation, the abusive treatment he received in the Oval Office, his popularity in many European countries, especially Britain, went up, and it was already high. It went up in Ukraine as well. Now amongst GOP, those who identify as GOP, who are not embarrassed, to do such. It's now gone into single figures. And I've seen comments like, well, of course, this is partly Russia's doing, but yeah, those Ukrainians, they've really, failed in their PR and blah, 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 blah. this really is, a projection of the American psychodrama, their internal kind of political partisan meltdown, the sort of cult of Trump that's sort of taken over everything and warped perception of reality. I mean, I do not think it's worth even discussing seriously what people in the GOP think of Zelensky, because he's now so completely warped and manipulated. It's barely even possible to have a rational conversation. And this is even with people who identify and actually are very active pro-Ukrainians, but
Yeah,
within
I'll be interested to
the
see
GOP.
what poll that is and what the methodology is, because I don't know that I've seen such an incredible poll as that. I mean, one of the latest ones you're looking at here, NBC poll: most Americans are rooting for Ukraine, but nearly half think, and there's a nuance here, but nearly half think that Trump prefers Russia. So it's not that, but that's different to what the general population thinks. So it's really interesting that there is this perception, as you would expect, because it certainly seems that way. We talk about it all the time, that Trump does seem to be supporting Russia more than Ukraine.
Yeah.
A few super chats here. Crusader Damien, for you. If the US comes over our Canadian border in anger, what do you believe Britain and even NATO will do? That's a hypothetical that I can't comprehend, because I don't think he would do that. I think it has to be a form of economic coercion. And if he did ask that, I think you would get such a blowback within the US population and within the US armed forces as well, and within the US Congress. I think it would just be you would have absolute political chaos. But I think he wants that to happen. But I just don't think the mechanisms in the US would allow that to happen. Now, I think the more pertinent question, and someone asked this to me today, is why, or what's the situation with, say, the UK and EU support for Canada? And it seems to be quite muted, but my opinion is that things are happening in the background. There's an awful lot of support for Canada, and there's probably the willingness to do trade deals, knowing how powerful Canada is with natural resources and trade, that I think Starmer and the UK will be wanting to get really close to Canada. The EU will be as well, but they won't be saying it too publicly for fear of antagonizing Trump. And so I think you'll find a unison and a support for Canada. It just won't be as vocal as Canadians might like.
I mean, I don't yet believe they would physically invade Canada, because that would be a level of insanity just off the charts. Greenland, however, that's a serious concern, and for Europe, that would have to trigger an incredibly serious response. But that annexation would likely it would resemble more the takeover of Crimea. It would be I would imagine there wouldn't be a full-on military confrontation, especially given there's already a lot of US troops stationed there. That would resemble the sort of Little Green Men type operation, I would imagine. And of course, there would be huge civic protest and civil disobedience, but it wouldn't be an absolute bloodbath. Invading Canada, I mean, come on, that would be an absolute bloodbath, because you think of Canadians, the number of Canadians who have shotguns, the number of Canadians who actually, when push comes to shove, would not want to be Americans. I mean, the sense of outrage and the sheer scale of death and destruction would be incalculable. So I'd seriously have problems thinking that Canada is going to, be invaded, but they will certainly, keep coming with trade blows and so on. That will drive Canada into the arms of Europe. I rather hope that actually, in a couple of months' time, we might be talking about a sort of commonwealth of democracies forming a kind of free trade area that overlaps with the EU, which Britain could become part of. And this could encompass Korea, this can encompass Japan and other free entities around the world. This is essentially the response of global democracy to form a global single market. I haven't seen this being discussed really anywhere publicly, but I think this is where the authoritarian slide, especially in the US, is going to drive things. This is actually great news for the UK. This is our way back in to become both a global player and also be a full participant on the European stage as well. It'd be ironic, of course, that this might be the result of Russia/Trump's actions, but I can see that happening, and then the US wouldn't just be attacking Canada if it makes moves on any democratic entity. It would be making moves on a kind of alliance of democratic nations. I mean, this could also dovetail perhaps with NATO and with an expanded and diminished NATO at the same time, and NATO without the US, but which could include other global democracies into a sort of global military alliance. I mean, who knows? This might all sound fantastical, but things are moving ridiculously fast.
Someone's asked me from your channel to post the link to the Telegraph article, and I can't post it on your. If I post it here, it goes to my my one, so
Pop
I
it in the
can't do
private
that.
chat. I'll put it in the description.
Yeah, that'd be
That
fabulous. And I just wanted to also mention a comment from Karen Spanook, who's a Canadian, who says this, and actually this is pertinent to what we we're just talking about. So yes, Prime Minister Carney, so Mark Carney, keeps saying we don't need anyone's support, so other countries don't need to speak up. So I don't know if you've heard him in particularly one of his speeches the other day when he was asked this question, and he said, look, do you think people should be coming to your support publicly or whatever? And he said, look, I don't need their support. We're strong enough. We're blah, 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 blah. And that was good for two reasons. One was it was projecting strength from him and Canada. And he was just like, yeah, whatever, don't need their help. But also it was giving permission for other leaders not to have to come publicly. Like, it was clever statesmanship, I think, from Mark.
And do you know why he said that? He said that because in private, they've already given that support. So
and that's what I mean. I think things are happening behind the scenes. And this goes then onto this comment from Jay, who says, Europe is on a war footing. There are many things European leaders know that they're not telling us now, given that Russia's listening the whole time. This I fully think. I think the major powers in Europe, the leaders, know damn well what's going on. They know the truth. Everyone's having to juggle domestic issues like the UK at the moment. We are financially buggered. We just had our spring budget, and we've got to find like billions and billions of pounds worth of savings across the government, and growth forecasts aren't looking great, etc., etc. And then at the same time, we're saying we're going to spend more on defense, and we've committed to that, which is right. But the problem is you're having to rob Peter to pay Paul. And yeah, borrowing more sounds great, but we're paying £100 billion a year to service our debt already, and we just become even more indebted, and it becomes even more costly. And so, we need really creative ways to find money to support Ukraine and to support our own armed forces. And that's a challenge. Everyone knows, I think, the threat that Russia is. It's just, how do you communicate that to your electorate in a way that they fully support appropriating an awful lot of money to support Ukraine and your own defenses? And that's why Ursula von der Leyen and the EU are trying to come up with ways to allow that money to flow into Europe through other means, but those means are essentially borrowing money still. And so the countries that are more indebted are going to be somewhat less up for that happening. And that's kind of where we're at. Hopefully that's an accurate portrayal of what's going on. I mean, I don't know. Who knows?
It's difficult to know how woken up our leaders are, but it's certainly, it seems to me at least, Starmer, and I think there's some some acceptance of. But then when you look at the debates around the military reviews that are going on, and the proportion of GDP debates, they're still talking about half percentages, in 2 years' time. Now, whether that's a sort of public show and they're doing stuff behind the scenes, I don't know. But, the odd half point of GDP on defense over several years, that's not only not going to have any deterrence effect, that is not going to get us match fit for whatever is coming down the road.
I mean, it's difficult when the bigger the economy, obviously, the bigger that amount you've got to spend, but then you talk about percentages. But just a few more super chats and whatnot. Thank you, Remy Stevens. Bingo, great discussion. Thanks. Well, thank you. Putin puppet again. Most Americans don't have experience about having a Russian aggressive neighbor dictator. So I'm just trying to work out how to say this. An aggressive Russian neighbor. And dictators with world war battles on their soil. They aren't informed by the US media as well. Yeah, Gerda should join a trip to Ukraine. I always think anyone that casts opinion on Ukraine should get to Ukraine if possible, particularly Republicans in the United States, MAGA Republicans. I would love to see JD Vance and Donald Trump get their ass to Ukraine, see what it's actually like rather than talking bollocks about it, being informed by Russian propaganda. But I think there is a very interesting point brought up by Putin Puppet here, which is that the US after World War II, they didn't have to reconstruct their country, right? So it was not affected directly by war. So what they did is they piled loads of armed forces into Europe and provided defense for Europe for ideological reasons, while Europe went around reconstructing itself, because literally Europe had been torn apart by war. And so the US has never, apart from Pearl Harbor, never really experienced war on its shores and had that effect. So it's always having war in foreign places as sort of a way of projecting its power. And I think that there's an interesting dynamic there. So they're not going to feel as the American public aren't going to feel naturally, just like we talked about in Europe. They're much further away from the war, and they keep talking about that. This is an ocean away. But the flip side is that the US is at the top of the hegemonic ladder. They are the supreme power in the world. And if you want to maintain yourself as a supreme power, you have to project that power, and you project that through soft power. Interesting today that they've turned they've reversed two things. The US, I think they've reversed the Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty funding, even though Europe was going to pick up on that. I think that's been reversed. And also I think the funding, USAID funding into stolen Ukrainian children. So that's been reversed today. Anyway, that's just something else. But yeah, the US want to, if they want to remain at the top of the ladder, they've got to invest abroad and to get that return on investment. And the problem is many American people, the electorate, don't recognize the importance of doing that. And because they don't see the immediate return on investment themselves, they say, right, I want you to spend on freaking hospitals so that when I'm ill, or my schools so that when my kids go to school, and you see things locally, and you see the benefits of expenditure locally. You don't see the expenditure out there, which is why USAID funding was the easy one to cut, because you don't see the benefit but tangibly.
And those who've been, actually arguing that, and this is where it gets quite interesting, I think, because this is going to sound quite perverse, but the US is a very innovative society, but it's also quite a hierarchical one, and especially when it comes to politics. But perhaps in some ways even more so than Britain, which sometimes can feel extremely sort of stodgy to me, and quite possibly to you as well. Incredibly bureaucratic, incredibly hierarchical, actually incredibly centralized, but also fragmented at the same time. You've got all these states with their own, different laws and processes and layers of legal this, that, and the other, and yet you've got a huge kind of bloated bureaucracy in Washington. So in some ways, you could make some cursory comparisons to the USSR, a quite inefficient, hugely bloated, massively overextended military power, who is, built up its indebtedness beyond perhaps the possibility of its economy to be particularly healthy, and that's starting to stifle innovation. It's starting to stifle, SMEs, small businesses, the man in the street, globalization really eating into local communities and so on. So you can see why some people would look at Washington and say, this is like a great big tumor, sucking the life out of the country, and we have to deal with it. So I think that's why it's been relatively easy for them to sort of take a chainsaw to the bureaucracy, because of these decades of resentment. And then you have partisan politics, piled in. The trouble is, this isn't a solution, is it? You don't just go in and smash something up. Um, because you're just going to be left with a pile of rubble. You have this in companies. Now, sometimes when a company's overextended, you have to make difficult cuts and so on. But you don't literally cut everything. You look at the bits that are healthy, you do proper analysis, and you say, okay, well, we'd love to be doing this X, Y, and Z or selling these products. But actually, if we carry on doing this, this, and this, and this, then we're going to go bankrupt. So let's focus on what we do really well and where we make a profit, and we cut away the dead wood and we keep the healthy stuff. Well, that would be a reasonable process, but that's not what Musk are doing and Trump, because they're not reasonable people. They're going in and they're hacking the green wood and the brown wood and the dead wood and this, and they're going at the roots and they're going everywhere because they have no flipping plan or idea what they're doing. That's no solution.
I think they do have an idea what they're doing, but they don't understand the ramifications of what they're doing and how they're doing it. Actually, someone said this, and it's a bit pejorative, but actually, there's something in this. I wonder what Mango Mussolini, so Donald Trump, understands really. And this idea that Trump actually believes he showed strength when yelling at Zelensky. What a sad orange man. But the point is that I think he does have a simplistic view. So shouting at Zelensky makes him feel strong and powerful. But then as soon as he's out that, he was tag teaming with JD Vance, but as soon as he's out there, the Fox News is defending what he did and making it seem like Zelensky was a bad guy, and then shoring up all of those feelings that Trump had. So he is completely defended all day and every day, and there's a foundation and a blanket for him of Fox News, right, and this information space, and that also allows him to get away with being deeply ignorant. So he doesn't know stuff about pretty much everything. He's got a really simplistic understanding. He's got a really simplistic way of speaking. Everything about Trump, I think, is deeply simplistic. And he has these ideas about, I want to be as someone who's really powerful that no one can say no to. I want to be the apprentice. I want to be in charge of this. I want to be the CEO of this company where I can say you're fired to anyone. That's what I want. That's a leader I want to be. And I think he's that simplistic. And then, all the other people then run around trying to like post hoc rationalize all these decisions, or they're feeding him with ideas for him to do that makes him feel like that. But they are the ones that have the ideology, the Project 2025 lot. So it's a mixture of all this stuff, but I think he is deeply ignorant. And prove me wrong. Tell me, and sorry, I know I've done a lot of speaking, but Jonathan, what I would say to all Trump supporters is give me the one speech he has ever made is in his entire political career where he has shown a deep, granular understanding of the topic he's talking about. Honestly, seriously freaking show me the 5 minutes, the 10 minutes, the 20 minutes, the 2 minutes where he's actually been deeply detailed in his knowledge about anything, right? And it's not there. Did you hear what he said again yesterday?
It's not there.
About fertilization.
Not once.
I'm the fertilization president. It's like, what does that mean? You absolute. Yeah, sorry.
I mean, that one, he probably does know something about the topic, but it's not exactly, I would say, a clinician's knowledge of the subject. It's quite a, grungy kind of understanding of the topic. I mean, also, Jonathan, show me a single speech where he has shown human empathy, actual empathy for another human being or another group of human beings. That also does not exist.
Well, I mean, it's just honestly, some of the things he says are just so unbelievably insane. So that you're thinking not only is he ignorant, but I don't think he's all there. And I think he's getting worse. Like the whole groceries thing he keeps saying. So that famous like interview where he's like groceries. Nobody's even heard of the word groceries until recently. It's like, if you've not heard of the grocery store, like what are you talking? Like groceries were a total disaster under Biden. Under Trump, tremendous. Strong men come up to me with tears in their eyes and tell me, "Sir, thank you for making groceries great again." I mean, what are you talking about? This is just insanity. But there you go.
I think the price of eggs doesn't exactly talk to the success of his policies there. I mean, that's not looking particularly good.
Quite, and I just want to show you this. I'm going to share the screen in a slightly different way because I want the sound on for this. But just this is what he's just said, and it blows my mind. Hopefully, you can hear this.
You're doing great on it, and we're going to have tremendous goodies in the bag for women too. The women, between the fertilization and all of the other things that we're talking about, it's going to be great. We're
Goodies in the bag.
fertilization. I'm still very proud of it. I don't care.
Proud of what?
I'll be known as the fertilization president, and that's okay. That's not bad. That's not bad. I've been called much worse.
But the fact is, like, the people laughing and almost validating that, it's so funny. But unfortunately, it overlooks how insane that set of words were in the order that they were put. Like, we're going to have tremendous goodies in the bag for women too. The woman, between the fertilization and all the other things we're talking about, it's going to be great. Fertilization. I'm still very proud of it. I don't care. I'll be known as the fertilization president, and that's okay. That is, and excuse my French, that is fucking insane, right? And anyone, I'm sorry to swear, but anyone that voted for that guy and say he's my guy, he tells it like it is. It's like, what is like it is? Is like it is being mental. Like, he tells it like he's mental. Yes, okay, that's the right guy to vote for if you want somebody who's utterly mental in charge of your country. It's just like, that is nonsense. And when I'm talking about him being ignorant, if he doesn't read, he doesn't receive intelligence briefings, he talks like that, and he doesn't seem to have a grasp of what's going on. And in public, when he was asked about the signal thing the other day, he then said, yeah, it had a bad signal. And he thought signal, like it was a signal on a telephone and not like it's an app, a messaging app. Like, it's just, what is...
I mean, but not a normal person who has that level of ignorance, one would like to think they just keep their mouth shut and they think like, yeah, I'm not going to say anything at this point because I'm not really sure what's being said, but I'll kind of nod meaningfully. The kind of thing I do in meetings all the time, Oh, yeah, of course, yeah. But of course, he has to open his mouth as a narcissist. And as someone who's deeply insecure, he cannot be seen to not have an opinion on a subject or just, spew or vomit some kind of nonsense up on that subject. But no, if you, and this was my point, unfortunately, why I have the so-called Trump derangement syndrome, and I have it pretty badly, which is I do actually listen to his speeches, and I listened to most of his speeches during the campaign trail in
So did I.
2016.
Yeah.
Yep. And I listened to almost every day in office, every piece of garbage that came out of his fat orange gob. And none of it shows expertise in anything except the ability to market, except the ability to literally spew words out and try to calculate the response to those words without necessarily understanding any of the values or meanings behind the phrases. But what he is able to do is to acquire phrases, loosely string them into what might be termed a sentence, although I wouldn't term it a sentence with my British education, and then spew it out and test, what response he gets. He's a marketer in real time. Good old rant, yes, absolutely. 30 years ago, somebody said I should, that's how I'd make my fortune, is in ranting. And unfortunately, I didn't listen to them, and I went trying to get a proper job. But it turns out that is what I should have done all along. But that he's good at that. He's good at spewing word salad out and trying to sort of test the market of what works and what people want. But that's it. There's no understanding of the concepts that sit behind those. But just that, goodies in the bag. I don't want to know what good is. I don't want to know what sack he's talking about, because I have a pretty good idea that it is shriveled little scrotal, and mushroom penis affair thing that he's got going. But I don't want to know. And that shouldn't be coming out of someone who was in charge of the most powerful nation in history. And if you voted for that, sorry, you've got to screw loose too.
There you go. Well, we're that is top quality geopolitical analysis, I think, from the two Jonathans there. There's no doubt about it. I guess as we're meandering towards the end, Jonathan, let's do some final thanks for people. Jesper Pettersson, thank you very much for the Danish love there, and Kevin Forst, as ever, a total legend. Thanks for the geopolitics memberships. Julian Roster, as we've already asked that question, thank you very much formally there. David, 5 Silicon Curtain memberships. That's awesome for the JF. Richard Bennett, awesome support from yourself as ever. And Johnny Nevregard, always great to have you in the community. Tim Mommons, 5 ATP Geopolitics memberships. That's very kind. And we have Crusader Damien, one of Jonathan Fink's supporters, giving quite a few supportive super chats there. And Putin Puppet, really appreciate your support, and Remy Stevens as well. And just a few more, Putin Puppet there, and Linda S from Australia. Thank you very much for your support. With Okie Dokie, for some coffee or tea or whatever. Big hugs. Thank you. Big virtual hugs to all of the community. Thank you to all of you for being here. And thank you for those supporting as well. It keeps the lights on. So thank you very much. And then finally, Putin Puppet. There were talks about rebuilding the Nord Stream gas pipeline by the US. What if Trump blackmails Europe with blocking gas delivery? This is a weird
talk. This is unfortunately, it's less weird when you accept the idea that the US has not only changed sides, but actually has a deal with Putin to carve up Ukraine's resources and indeed carve Europe up. That then starts to make sense, because you're not looking at Europe as an independent entity able to make its own sovereign decisions. You're starting to look at it as an imperial vassal, which can be coerced into rebuilding Nord Stream and doing what the hell you like. So we are looking at a new imperialist phase where the US is in alliance with a revanchist imperial Russia. That's the only interpretation I can take from that.
It doesn't make a lot of sense economically, though, because actually the US does very well out of Nord Stream not being functional, right? So the US is now the world's biggest LNG exporter, and it exports an awful lot of LNG, liquefied natural gas, which is gas in liquid form, because Europe can't get gas in gas form from Russia because Nord Stream 2 blew up, right? So actually the US is doing very well out of that. And if Nord Stream 2 was rebuilt and became functional again, then you can rest assured that the US LNG exports would go down. So it's just insanity.
Well, unfortunately, if you've got Putin whispering in your ear, don't listen to the guys that are telling you this is no good for you. They're part of the deep state, right? Listen to me, right? This is a far better deal. You know, you can see how this might work. I mean, look at the damage that Trump is doing to his own domestic car industry through global tariffs. It's quite clear he doesn't understand the implications, not only of what he says, but what he's doing. And you say, well, surely there's some people in his team who understand this. Well, those that understand it are not saying, because they're sycophants. They know that as soon as they start criticizing, they're out, and then they're going to have their reputations destroyed, and their status and their livelihoods and everything like that. But Trump has shown that in this term, he's able to hire fanatics, sycophants, lickspittles, and lackeys by the bucket load. It's an entire list of psychotic non-entities and cronies. It's purely nepotistic. That is going to lead to catastrophically bad decisions. This is why I call this episode on my channel, you know, the return of the USSR. But this time you've got, you know, big brother in Moscow and little brother in Washington, because you're seeing a corrupt idiocracy, a system built on nepotism and stupidity being erected in Washington, just as it historically has existed in the Kremlin.
And I think there's, it's interesting trying to work out what Trump is trying to do with, say, tariffs, right? So if a really simplistic view, and again, it goes back to this overt simplicity that I think is on display, that if you think, right, I want all jobs to be, I want everything that the US makes to be, everything the US consumes to be made in the US. So let's tariff the crap out of everyone. So the question is, does he really believe tariffs are a tax on the other countries, or does he actually understand that it's a tax on his own consumer? But if he's thinking in a really simplistic long-term view, then if I want to onshore all of these jobs, and then I'm going to take control of Canada and Greenland and have this kind of empire, this expansion, but actually it's isolationism, whereby I don't want to interact globally with all these other entities and actually trade. I don't want to trade surplus or deficit. I almost don't want to trade. Well, actually, we'll export stuff to people, but we're not going to import anything because we make it all ourselves. Then, there is a weird logic to that. I mean, it's not weird logic. It's perfectly logical, but you then have to discount all of the absolute shitstorm that's going to come along from putting that in place. Like, that's a 50-year plan, right? Where you're not going to have an integrated globalist production process that involves parts that are components that are either fully from other places, or you make the components out of bits from all. Yeah, I can understand what you might be trying to achieve, but the insanity of doing that will push prices up, will bring all these other issues that may get sorted out. That's 50 years down the line. And if you don't understand that, you're an idiot.
I mean, he is an idiot. I mean, there's no two ways about it. He's a colossal moron. I mean, there's no question of that. And he understands. I mean, it's a wonder he barely understands how to breathe and copulate, let alone, well, we don't even know about that one. And Melania certainly isn't going to tell us. I lost my train of thought there in my absolute sort of rant and insight. I lost it. Well, I was going to say, you've got a fantastic troll comment that just popped up, which grabbed my attention. Might not be a troll, might be a real person, but anyone, who quotes Jeffrey Sachs, in my mind, is really verging on troll territory. But he says the US blocked Nord Stream, according to Jeffrey Sachs. I thought
that could be no. I think that could be sarcasm. Because,
okay.
yeah. So you got Seymour Hersh and Sachs and Mearsheimer and all that lot.
Absolutely, the whole crowd of
yeah.
I know what I was going to say. I mean, Trump will do things, but he won't know the consequences of his actions. And then when those consequences come apparent, he'll sort of well, do something else. Do this and do that. It's like a child in charge of a complex machine, and like pull a lever and something weird happens. Right, let's just pull all the levers and try and fix it. That's how he seems to be operating. He has no real idea of what the consequences of actions are, because I think he exists on a very simplistic level. There are those who are like, why did he say? We had this argument on the last live stream. Well, I listened to the rest of the live stream you had on, even though I couldn't participate because of my cold. And I wanted to jump in because, you're having this conversation with Gerdes, and he was saying he doesn't really believe what he says. And you were like, yes, he does. And I think you're both right, because I think, I have some experience of a kind of narcissistic, sociopathic character. Now, Putin, again, I would disagree with what was said there. I think Gerdes was labeling Putin as a sociopath, and you were talking about Trump as a narcissist. No, I think this is slightly worse.
No, that was me. I label.
It was you.
I think Putin is a sociopath and Trump.
No, I think he's a psychopath. I mean, he's a functional psychopath.
Yeah. I won't disagree with that.
Trump is a sociopath. He's a sociopathic narcissist. He does like manipulating people. He's just not smart enough to do it really effectively over the kind of long term there. That's an extraordinarily, obviously dangerous sort of combination there. But I've got experience of this. When people sort of, have these personality traits, and often under stress or duress, and as they get older, they become caricatures themselves. And the human characteristics they may have had, empathetic characteristics they may have had earlier in their lives, those start to fall away until they become a caricature of themselves. And this is clearly where Trump is. But my direct experience of someone who has a kind of narcissistic, sociopathic personality is they will use words to manipulate others into doing what they want. And they may or may not believe those things when they craft the stories, but almost the instant that story comes out of their mouths, it becomes reality for them. Reality is less important than the version of it they craft. And the version they craft is only important insofar as they can use it to manipulate others to do their bidding. As soon as that story loses the efficacy of not changing the world or reflecting the world, forget about reality. It's about manipulation of people and their behaviors. As soon as a story loses its power to manipulate behavior of those around you, it's not that it's true or not true, it's just not useful anymore. So you abandon it and you start to craft a new story. So talking about whether he believes or not, or what his reality is, I think is a complete distraction, because he doesn't think in those terms.
Yeah,
It's a way of
but,
crafting stories to build a reality around you,
but you
and that
believe
only
those
is
stories.
valid.
I
You
say this
believe them
because
because you believe them. You believe them
you create
until they're not
narrative.
effective anymore.
Yeah,
When they're not
yeah.
effective, it's not that you don't believe them anymore. You simply abandon them. They're like the skin of an amphibian that gets shed, and you grow a
Yeah.
new one.
I have a child who has very similar tendencies to narcissistic personality disorder, pathological demand avoidance. There's some overlap, but one of the things is creating his own narratives to make him be not at fault for anything, which is exactly
Yes.
what Trump does. So
Yeah,
Trump
this
is
is
never
just-
at fault for anything. And I'm pretty sure he will create his own narratives as to what is going on. But the key is that,
Yeah.
that they believe it. So
they do
this
believe
goes,
it as long as it's useful, though. I mean, the minute it
Yeah,
stops
yeah.
being useful in manipulating those
Yeah.
around you, it's neither true or not true. It's just not useful anymore, and you move on to the next thing, right?
Whereas I think a sociopath would understand they're spinning lies and using those lies to. I think there's more likely to that. There's probably an element of both with them, etc. But I just think. Yeah. Anyway, that's maybe some armchair psychologizing there.
We need to get a trained therapist in to talk that one through with us. But I think for those that are trying to rationalize Trump, it really doesn't help, does it? Because he does not think or act like you or I. He's living in a different version of reality. Have you listened to Mary Trump? I know she's implacably opposed.
At times,
but,
yes, yeah. I've not read a book, but yes, like interesting to listen to her. And what's Trump's nephew? But anyway, him as well. Quite interesting to listen to. Just a few. I've got a few things to say. So a few thanks to finish off. Love your shows. With love from Nathan. That's one of yours, Tony Yati and Niemi. AT and Niemi. Thank you very much, Tony, on behalf of Mr. Fink. Mitch Mazarol, one of my legends. Thanks for everything you gents are doing. Lucid thoughts in a murky world. I like to think these are very murky thoughts in a probably lucid world. But thanks, Mitch. You're an absolute diamond. Terry Feller, one of yours, saying NAFO rules. Great session, guys. Thank you very much, Terry. And actually, talking of which, we at ATP Geopolitics, along with Rick the Ukrainian and Roman Trokimets, have just finished our NAFO campaign of raising 78,000 euros, which is absolutely incredible. So thank you to all of those involved. And just to let you know, and I'm sure this will get updated, because at atpgeo.com/donate, it will take you to whatever campaign we're doing. So we're just going to be switching that over to this Car for Ukraine. Now, Jonathan and myself drove trucks out for Car for Ukraine to Lviv on behalf of the charity when we did our last fundraiser. That was a Christmas one. We're now involved in an Easter one, which is, Jonathan Fink and myself. So I'm sure Jonathan will have a link to this. I've not really started. There's only 124 euros in there, but I've not launched this either. But lots of people on board. Ukraine Matters, Andrew Mikado, Sukhumi Mimus, Renegade Chungus, Kanti Ludan, Rick the Ukrainian, Silicon Curtain, The Shills, PS01, Baba Yaga Fella, On the Edge, that's Phil Ittner, ATP Geopolitics, Laser Pig, Eric, Rudy Acosta Jr., War Translated, and Tanya Fiona. So a whole bunch of people involved in trying to get 220,000. So that's obviously a lot of money there.
Big
But
campaign,
there's a lot of YouTubers that are just starting this one off.
And we're at 41 now, so not a bad start. Some way to go, but it's certainly we've got a nice inroad into that, and they got some really nice goodies as well, haven't they, for this campaign? Pins and badges and whatnot.
Yes, I probably need to get Claire and Ivan on to have a live and chat that through. Which obviously, if you want to double up there, we can do that.
I will love to do that. Obviously, as you know, next week a little more challenging, but yeah. Or maybe you don't know.
No, I don't know, but I assume that you've got a busy week next week.
In a manner of speaking, yes. Well, we'll have a chat about that. Maybe on Friday we'll have another. Maybe it's tomorrow, isn't it? Maybe another little mini chat tomorrow. But I can give you some more details. But yes, it's going to be interesting next week. Awesome.
Well, good. That sounds intriguing. Well, look, thank you very much to everyone in the live chat. You are legends. And I just want to say something from my channel. Where I'm doing my military aid video after this, which has already been recorded. But Benny Pye suggested, and I've thought about this previously as well, as doing a premiere. Because you guys are already there, if you want to chat in a live chat, I'm going to do the pre-record as a premiere. And what that does is it makes it live, even though I'm not there live. But for those in America, I'm going to go to bed now. But for those in America who want a late night, if you want to stay chatting in the live feeds together while listening to the military aid video, you can do that. It will be effectively a live, going live in 2 minutes at 11:20. So if you guys want to head over to there, feel free to do that, and it'll be great to see you over there. And I'll probably read the live chat in bed. But thank you so much anyway to you guys.
That just broke my brain. If you got a time machine or something, I don't know. I'm not sure how that all works.
I will be naked, Jonathan. I will be naked.
Okay, well that nightmares, cue nightmares.
Awesome
between Trump's little orange button mushroom of an affair and
my walnut whip, and
your walnut whip. That's too much.
Awesome. Okay, well, too much information. Thanks everybody. Really appreciate that. Glad to know that we brought the standard down deeply at the end. That's into the gutter where I like to be. Awesome.
We got good viewing as well. These evening slots tend to do a lot better than the afternoon one. We've got 1,684 people watching on Silicon Curtain, so that's pretty decent. And overall, when people sort of have watched the recorded version, we should hit about 10-12K. I would have thought for that at least. So
amazing.
That's good going.
You're a man that thinks about these things
combined.
Yeah, I just put out stuff whenever it tumbles out of my mouth. I don't think about these things.
Splurge, don't you? But you got some pretty decent figures there. You get damn big audiences given your how should I call it,
proliferation of
yes.
words.
Your copiousness when it comes to
don't stop bloody talking. Awesome sauce. Well, look, take care, Jonathan. Take care, everyone else, and stay on the line, Jonathan. And I will close this off. And you guys head over to AGP if you fancy some more of this punishment. In the meantime, Slava Ukraini.
Haram Slava Smert Haragam.
Awesome.